You are in a conversation with someone who cannot grasp what you're saying. Not because they're distracted, not because they're tired, but because their mind operates on a fundamentally different frequency. You explain your reasoning with precision, you lay out the evidence, you offer nuance, and they meet your clarity with certainty, your logic with dogma, your hesitation with absolute conviction. You feel the friction, you feel the exhaustion. You start asking yourself the same dangerous question. Why can't they see it? Stop asking why. Start understanding what. What you're experiencing isn't a moral failure. It isn't a personal slight. It's a structural limitation of the human condition. For centuries, we've been sold the comforting lie that intelligence is evenly distributed, that everyone possesses the same raw capacity for reflection, and that if you just explain things clearly enough, people will understand. You know better now. You feel it in every meeting, every comment section, every holiday dinner, every workplace where the loudest voice drowns out the most accurate one. This is where most people choose resentment. They choose cynicism. They choose the exhausting, soul-crushing belief that if the world is this blind, they must be the ones who are wrong. But there is another path, a colder, clearer, profoundly liberating path. It was mapped out in the 19th century by a philosopher who refused to romanticize the human mind. Arthur Schopenhauer did not believe in universal enlightenment. He believed in radical honesty. He understood that the intellect is not the master of the human organism, it is its servant. And when you finally see that truth, you stop fighting reality. You stop begging for comprehension. You stop draining your energy on minds that simply cannot reach the heights you inhabit. This is not a call to superiority, it's a call to survival. In the next 20 minutes, you will learn how Schopenhauer's philosophy, validated by modern psychology, dismantles the myth of rational persuasion. You will learn why correcting people is a form of self-sabotage, and you will discover the exact strategies the intellectually awake use to navigate a world that cannot think its way out of its own limitations. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of the Unreachable Mind. First, you must abandon the illusion that stupidity is a choice. You treat intellectual limitation like a behavioral flaw you can correct through better communication. It is not. It is a neurological and philosophical reality. Schopenhauer made this brutally explicit when he wrote, "The ordinary person does not lack the capacity to think, but lacks the inclination to use it." Notice the precision. He didn't say they lack capacity, he said they lack the inclination. And inclination is not a switch, it's a biological orientation. Think about the last time you watched someone defend a position that was empirically collapsed. They weren't lying, they genuinely believed it. Their confidence wasn't manufactured, it was absolute. You recognized the gap immediately. You tried to bridge it, and the gap only widened. What you were witnessing is what modern psychology now calls the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias wherein individuals with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. But psychology arrived at this discovery a century after Schopenhauer articulated the mechanism. He called it the will's domination over the intellect. Your brain is not a truth-seeking machine. It is a desire-satisfying machine. The will, the blind, striving force that Schopenhauer placed at the core of all existence, uses your intellect as a tool, not a compass. When the will wants to believe something, the intellect doesn't search for facts, it searches for justification. This is why you see people with minimal exposure to a subject speak with absolute certainty, while those with decades of study speak in cautious, qualified terms. The unreflective mind doesn't know what it doesn't know. The reflective mind is haunted by what it does. Consider 3 scenarios. First, a manager with no industry knowledge restructures your department based on a podcast he listened to on the commute.
Second, a family member constructs elaborate theories about global economics after reading 3 headlines. Third, a colleague insists their outdated method is superior because it's how we've always done it. You don't need evidence for these. You've lived them. You recognize the pattern. First, it is dismissed. Second, it is rationalized. Third, it is defended with unshakable conviction. The intelligent few don't fall into this trap. You question your own assumptions. You sit with uncertainty. You allow your conclusions to remain provisional until reality forces refinement. That's not indecision, that's intellectual hygiene. Schopenhauer observed, talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. But most minds aren't looking at targets. They're looking at reflections. They're mistaking familiarity for truth, repetition for proof, volume for validity. You cannot argue someone out of a position they didn't argue themselves into. You must understand this. First, it is biological. Second, it is structural. Third, it is inescapable unless you stop trying to fix it.
Chapter 2. The Tyranny of the Unreflective. If intellectual limitation is structural, why does it dominate public space? Why do the least reflective voices command the most attention? Because confidence is mistaken for competence. Because simplicity is mistaken for clarity. Because the human nervous system, wired for survival, prioritizes speed over accuracy, certainty over nuance, and emotional resonance over factual precision. You feel this every day. You scroll through a feed where shallow takes trend, where nuanced arguments get buried, where the loudest conviction gets the most engagement. You tell yourself it's an algorithm problem. It isn't. It's a human problem. The algorithm just monetizes your nature. Schopenhauer understood this long before social media existed. He saw that society does not elevate depth, it elevates utility. And in the marketplace of ideas, utility is measured by impact, not truth. The unreflective mind thrives in public spaces because it does not hesitate, it does not qualify, it does not doubt. Doubt is a luxury of the awake mind. Certainty is the currency of the sleeping one. When you speak with hesitation, you sound weak to them. When you speak with conviction, you sound right. You've adjusted your communication to accommodate this, haven't you? You simplify your language. You remove your caveats. You present complex realities as binary choices, and you still don't get through. Modern psychology confirms the mechanism. Research on vocal confidence bias shows that listeners judge speakers as more knowledgeable when they speak quickly, firmly, and without pause, regardless of accuracy. You've experienced this. You've sat in meetings where the least informed person commanded the room simply because they refused to leave space for uncertainty. You've watched leaders rise not through insight, but through unbroken narrative consistency. This is not a conspiracy, it's cognitive physics. The will wants movement. The intellect wants accuracy. The two are rarely aligned. Think about the last time you tried to explain a complex reality to someone operating on surface-level comprehension. You provided context, they demanded conclusions. You offered probability, they demanded certainty. You described systems, they pointed to anecdotes. You felt the exhaustion creep in. You wondered if you were failing. You weren't failing. You were speaking a language their nervous system wasn't built to process. Schopenhauer warned, the task is not so much to see what no one yet has seen, but to think what nobody yet has thought about that which everybody sees. But most people don't think. They react. They categorize. They defend.
they retreat. You're not dealing with malice, you're dealing with architecture. First, the mind seeks coherence, not truth. Second, the ego protects certainty, not growth. Third, the social environment rewards speed, not depth. When you stop expecting the unreflective mind to operate like the reflective one, you stop wasting your life on friction. You don't lower your standards, you raise your awareness, and awareness, once achieved, becomes armor. Chapter 3. The Futility of the Educator's Delusion. You've been taught that patience and explanation are virtues, that if you just articulate your point clearly enough, people will see the truth, that rational discourse is the foundation of progress. This is the educator's delusion. It is the belief that ignorance is an empty space waiting to be filled, rather than a fortified structure waiting to defend itself. You've tried it. You've laid out the data. You've mapped the logic. You've offered sources. And what happened? The defenses activated. The eyes glazed over. The tone shifted. You were no longer having a conversation. You were conducting an audit on a mind that refused to be inspected. Why does mainstream advice fail so consistently? Because it misunderstands the mechanism of belief formation. Modern cognitive psychology calls it confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret, remember, and prioritize information that aligns with pre-existing views. But it's deeper than bias, it's identity. When you challenge someone's belief, you're not just challenging an idea, you're threatening a psychological structure. The amygdala fires, the prefrontal cortex dampens, defense replaces reflection. You're not debating logic, you're negotiating survival. Schopenhauer saw this centuries before neuroscience could measure it. He wrote, "People cannot be convinced of anything except by their own thinking, not by the thinking of others." Let that sink in. Not by the brilliance of your argument, not by the elegance of your evidence, not by the patience of your tone, by their own thinking, which means correction is impossible from the outside. Insight can only emerge from within, and it rarely does. Ask yourself 3 questions. First, how many times have you corrected someone online only to watch them dig in deeper? Second, how many workplace initiatives have you proposed with clear data, only to see them derailed by unspoken hierarchy and unexamined tradition? Third, how many personal conversations have dissolved because the other person mistook your nuance for condescension, your precision for arrogance, your hesitation for weakness? You know the answers. You've tracked them in silence. You've learned to measure your words before speaking them. You've learned to smile when the logic fractures. You've learned to walk away before the drain becomes permanent. This is not cynicism. This is calibration. You weren't built to convert minds. You were built to protect your own. When you accept that the unreflective will not be reasoned into reflection, you stop exhausting yourself on a project that was never yours to manage. You stop mistaking their certainty for competence. You stop mistaking your clarity for influence. You stop believing that truth left naked in public will win the room. It won't. It never has. It speaks to the prepared. It bypasses the unready. The intelligent few do not waste their breath on the deaf. They conserve it. They direct it. They speak only when resonance is possible, not when obligation is assumed. First, they recognize the limit. Second, they adjust the expectation. Third, they withdraw the effort. And in that withdrawal, they find their freedom.
Chapter 4. The Mechanics of Intellectual Isolation. To navigate this reality, you must understand the underlying mechanism. You must see why the mind resists truth, why it clings to simplification, why it rewards confidence over competence. It begins with a biological truth. The brain does not optimize for accuracy, it optimizes for efficiency. Modern neuroscience calls this predictive processing. The brain doesn't passively receive information, it actively predicts it. It generates models of reality, filters sensory input through those models, and only updates them when prediction error becomes too severe to ignore. In simpler terms, you don't see the world, you see your expectations of the world. Schopenhauer articulated this in philosophical terms long before fMRI scanners could map it. He understood that the intellect is not an independent observer. It is a servant to the will, the blind, striving, survival-oriented force that drives all living things. When the will wants safety, the intellect constructs comfort. When the will wants dominance, the intellect constructs justification. When the will wants cohesion, the intellect constructs dogma. The mind is not designed for truth, it is designed for coherence, and coherence is maintained by filtering out complexity, dismissing ambiguity, and elevating simplicity to the status of wisdom. Think of it like an operating system. You're running a high-capacity processor built for parallel tasks, recursive analysis, and continuous self-correction. They're running a streamlined legacy architecture optimized for speed, social alignment, and threat avoidance. You try to run complex software on their system. It doesn't crash out of malice, it crashes out of limitation. First, the hardware restricts the software. Second, the software triggers the firewall. Third, the system reverts to factory settings. You don't blame the machine. You don't curse the manufacturer. You stop trying to force incompatible architectures to communicate. Modern psychology validates this through research on cognitive load and motivated reasoning. When information exceeds mental bandwidth, the brain defaults to heuristics, mental shortcuts, emotional anchors, tribal signals. When identity is threatened, the brain activates defense mechanisms before reflection can engage. You've seen this. You've watched highly educated people reject empirical data because it clashes with political allegiance. You've seen rational professionals defend irrational traditions because breaking tradition feels like betrayal. You've observed the gap between intelligence and wisdom, between education and insight, between information and understanding. Schopenhauer observed, the intellect was given to man only for the purpose of enabling him to satisfy his needs. It is a mere instrument, a tool like any other. Notice the implication. If the intellect is a tool, it serves the master, and the master is not reason. The master is desire. The master is fear. The master is the need to belong, to feel certain, to avoid the terror of not knowing. When you finally see this, you stop taking intellectual limitation personally. You stop internalizing their resistance as your failure. You recognize the architecture. First, the brain predicts, not perceives. Second, the will drives, not the mind. Third, defense precedes reflection. You don't fight the current, you learn to navigate it. And navigation requires distance, precision, and silence.
Chapter 5. The Architecture of Strategic Distance. Understanding the mechanism is only half the equation. Application is the other. You know now why they cannot reach you. You know now why correction fails. You know now why confidence masquerades as competence. The question becomes, what do you do? Not what should you feel. What do you actually do? The mainstream answer is to engage, to educate, to persist. It is wrong. It drains. It isolates. It punishes the awake. The Schopenhauerian approach is different. It does not demand conversion. It demands calibration. It does not seek victory. It seeks preservation. It does not fight reality. It structures distance. First, you practice strategic silence.
You stop offering your depth to minds that only want surface. You stop explaining nuance to systems that reward simplicity. You speak when resonance is possible. You withhold it when resistance is guaranteed. This is not cowardice, it's conservation. Second, you establish controlled exposure. You limit your time in environments that demand intellectual compromise. You curate your inputs. You choose conversations that challenge rather than drain you. You exit spaces where certainty replaces inquiry. Third, you cultivate inner sovereignty. You stop outsourcing your validation to minds incapable of providing it. You measure your worth by internal standards, clarity, consistency, integrity, depth. You no longer seek recognition from those who cannot recognize it. What not to do: argue with the unreflective, correct the defensive, expect gratitude for your clarity, assume that evidence will override identity, believe that volume indicates validity, wait for others to recognize your insight before you grant it to yourself. These are the traps of the educator's delusion. They keep you engaged in battles you were never meant to fight. They drain your energy, fracture your focus, and erode your peace. You've done it enough. You know the cost. What to do instead? Observe without absorbing, listen without internalizing, respond only when alignment is possible, withdraw when friction becomes permanent. Protect your mental architecture like you would a physical one. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can only do what he wills, and he can only will what he is." If you are built for reflection, you will reflect, you will question, you will doubt, you will refine, you will carry the weight of complexity, while others trade it for the comfort of certainty. That is not a curse, it is a design, and designs require boundaries. Triadic strategy for the awake. First, recognize the limit in others. Second, accept the structure in yourself. Third, enforce the boundary between them. You do not isolate to escape. You distance to preserve. You do not withdraw out of contempt. You step back out of clarity. The intelligent few do not seek to convert the unready. They seek to remain intact until the ready arrive. And when they do, recognition is immediate. Resonance is effortless. Depth meets depth. And the exhaustion finally ends.
Chapter 6. The Liberation of Lowered Expectations. Lowered expectations is not surrender. It is liberation. You've been taught that expecting less is cynicism, that accepting limitation is defeat, that recognizing the gap is despair. It is none of those things. It is clarity. It is the removal of friction. It is the end of the exhausting campaign to make reality conform to your hope. When you stop demanding that the unreflective become reflective, you stop suffering their failure to evolve. You stop taking their certainty as personal insult. You stop measuring your worth by their inability to comprehend it. You step out of the arena. You reclaim your energy. You return to what matters: depth, creation, integrity, inner coherence. Schopenhauer's pessimism is often misunderstood as nihilism. It is not. Nihilism says nothing matters. Pessimism says suffering is inherent and acceptance is the path through it. Depression says you are broken. Philosophical realism says the structure is fixed and your peace depends on navigating it, not dismantling it. You are not failing to reach them. They are operating within their architecture. You are operating within yours. The friction is not moral, it is mechanical. Once you see that, the weight lifts. First, you stop taking it personally. Second, you stop wasting your life on conversion. Third, you begin building your inner fortress. What does this look like in practice? It looks like smiling when someone states nonsense as fact.
It looks like nodding when someone reduces complexity to caricature. It looks like walking away when the conversation loops into dogma. It looks like choosing solitude over superficial company. It looks like investing in minds that match your frequency. It looks like reading, creating, thinking, refining, observing, without demanding that the world validate your process. Schopenhauer observed, "The ordinary person lives only to fill time. The exceptional person lives to fill the mind." You are not here to fill their time. You are here to fill your mind. Accept it. Most people are intellectually limited. Accept it. Most people cannot think critically. Accept it. Most people will defend simplicity because complexity demands work. And when you accept these truths, you do not fall into despair. You rise into freedom. Freedom from the need to correct. Freedom from the illusion of universal comprehension. Freedom from the exhausting labor of translating depth into sound bites. You are not superior. You are simply awake. And wakefulness requires boundaries. It requires silence. It requires the courage to let others remain who they are, while you become who you are.
Here is the culmination. Here is the truth you've been circling around since you first felt the friction. Intelligence is not distributed evenly. Depth is not universally accessible. Reflection is not a default setting. It is a discipline. It is a choice. It is a burden. And it is a gift. You were not built to make everyone understand you. You were built to understand yourself, your limits, your environment, and the architecture of the minds around you. When you stop demanding that reality conform to your hope, reality stops punishing you for hoping. When you stop begging for recognition from those incapable of giving it, recognition ceases to matter. When you stop fighting the current, you learn to swim it. Accept the limit, first in others, second in yourself, third in the space between them. Do not curse it. Do not romanticize it. Do not moralize it. Observe it. Structure around it. Protect your interior. Conserve your energy. Direct it where it resonates, where it multiplies, where it echoes back instead of fading into noise. Schopenhauer wrote, "The highest form of wisdom is to know that the world is irrational and to live anyway without demanding it change." You don't need to convert. You don't need to correct. You don't need to explain. You need to understand. You need to accept. You need to withdraw from the friction and return to your center. Stop fighting reality. Accept it. Stop begging for clarity. Provide it. Stop waiting for recognition. Earn it in silence. The intelligent few do not win arguments. They win peace. They win coherence. They win the right to think without interruption, to create without justification, to exist without performance. This is the brutal truth. This is the liberation. It doesn't come wrapped in hope. It comes wrapped in honesty. And honesty, once embraced, sets you free. If this resonated with you, you already know what to do next. You stop draining yourself on minds that cannot meet you. You start protecting the ones that can. Write in the comments, "It made sense to me." Let's see who's actually listening. Subscribe to Echo of Thought for more philosophical clarity. You don't need more noise. You need more signal. Stay awake. Stay sovereign. Keep thinking.